Hi, my name is Kerry Holzman, and I'm the co-host of the free podcast, Tech Vets. It's available at www.tech-vets.com. I want to thank all of you for helping us recently reach our 100th episode. It's taken a few years to get there, and it's quite a monumental milestone for us, and we couldn't have done it without your support. So thank you. We really appreciate it. Now, I apologize for the delay between videos. As you well know, I run my own computer repair business in the Phoenix area. And business sometimes gets really busy, and sometimes it gets really slow. And of course, business has to come first. The videos are something I do when I don't have anything like the podcast waiting or work to be done waiting. And in fact, the reason I'm making this video right now is a customer recently called me and said he needed a computer for his office. And this computer, he didn't want to buy from Dell or HP or any of the big manufacturers because he didn't want Windows 8. So of course we can still buy Windows 7 if we build it ourselves, and he wanted a computer that he wants to put on a shelf away from the reach of the employees, and preferably even a locked room or up high somewhere. And he's going to need a smaller computer to do that, smaller and lighter weight, or he's going to need a really big shelf. And the reason he wants this is he's getting a phone system put in that's going to record their phone calls. And of course, you've heard that when you call places that, the phone conversation may be recorded for quality purposes, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's what he wants to do. So the phone company is setting him up and said that he needs a Windows 7 computer. They recommended a 500 gig drive. They said that will hold 14,000 hours of telephone recording. So that's probably about 2 years worth. And I said, okay, we know we don't want it to get bogged down with any buffering issues. So we went ahead and said, RAM's cheap, 8 gigs is probably enough, but let's go 16. Let's go with an Intel-based processor, and let's go with a micro ATX case and a micro ATX motherboard. And he was all on board for it. So here's another computer build video. We're going to start with the case. I decided to go for something I haven't tried before. I've read good things about the Fractal case company. And so this is a Fractal Core 1000 computer case. It's a diminutive case. It's pretty small, micro ATX. Let's take a look at what it looks like. Sort of do the unboxing here. Because ultimately when we're done, we want this thing to look professional in a business environment, to look sharp, to look smart. So let's just take this and flip it upside down like that. This is the best way to get cases out of their boxes, by the way, if you haven't figured it out. If you've never done it before, you just take the box and flip it upside down like so. And don't be surprised if you get static shocked by all this styrofoam and plastic. But there's nothing you can hurt with static on the case, so no worries there. And when we deliver the computer, we're going to put it back in this box and back in the styrofoam and wrap it back in the plastic, so the customer is going to experience it brand new, just as we're opening it now. Certainly gives the customer the feel they're getting something new versus, building something and then just taking it to them like this. All right, so let's get that out of the way. So that's our tiny case. It's pretty nice. I like the face. I was kind of curious because none of the pictures showed me where the buttons or USB ports were, but they appear to be here on the side. So we've got the power button here, reset here, our power and hard drive lights down here. We've got 2 USB ports. These appear to be USB 2 because they're not blue. If they were blue, they'd be USB 3. He doesn't need that anyway. And then our output for headphone and input for microphone, which is often found on the front of computer cases. And we'll hook those up, but he's not going to use them. Anyway, the case is, let's see what the dimensions are here. I've got a tape measure. Here we go. This case measures, let's see, from the bottom here, it measures 14.5 inches tall. It's 7 inches wide. And overall, that's about 2/3 the size of a regular ATX case. So I think this will fit on a shelf nicely. It won't be too heavy, and the shelf won't have to be too low. You can get the shelf up much higher as a result. And the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to take these side panels off. Again, we just have the 2 screws on each side. And then what you want to do is you're going to want to put these screws and panels away, because they're going to be the last thing we put back on when we're all done with the computer. So we're just going to go ahead and get these pulled off of here, which may be easier said than done. You can see there's a lip here. I'm just getting my hand behind it, pulling back about 1 inch, and then the case cover just comes off like so. I'm just going to set that down here for right now. Just get that out of the way. And then we'll do the same thing here to this side. And this is a relatively inexpensive case, so I was a little worried when you get to cheaper price cases that you start losing quality. The case becomes flimsy, and as you can see, I had to struggle a little bit with the panels. On a more expensive case, the panels are like butter. If you've seen my most recent gaming PC build, you don't see me struggle with the panels like that. But again, it's a bit of you get what you pay for when it comes to a computer case. But I must say, for the price of this case, my overall opinion of it so far is it looks like it should cost a little bit more money. It is lightweight. You can tell it's not made of heavy steel. Whatever it is, it may be aluminum. I can't quite bend it. Well, I can bend it a little bit. It's a thin gauge steel, whatever it is, or aluminum, which helps keep the weight down, which is really important to me for this customer based on how they're going to use it. So now these are our front port umbilicals. This is our USB and audio header for the front, and then our reset switch, power LED, and hard drive LED. And of course, we'll hook those up a bit later. I'm just going to shove those out of the way over here. And what else do we have? We have these little wire ties here. We can take all these wire ties off. And then they give us a little box here that says Fractal Design. The box has a little bit of tape on it, so we can just remove that tape. Let's see what they give us with the case. All right, so the case gives us a 3.5-inch bay cover. So if we want to put a memory card reader or something like that in here, that's great that they include this. Most computer cases don't. In fact, that's the first I've seen in a long time. Nice touch from Fractal. And in the bag, we've got a bunch of screws and motherboard standoffs and a little speaker to hook onto the motherboard. And yeah, it appears to be about it. So that's what you get when you buy a case. That's typical. You'll also notice this case does not come with a power supply. And that's a good thing, because that allows me to choose the power supply I want versus being stuck with whatever the motherboard manufacturer included. The only exception to that would be Antec. I like Antec's cases and power supplies both. And so if I buy an Antec case that comes with an Antec power supply, most of the time I'll just go ahead and keep it that way, unless it's a super duper system where the power supply is not going to be strong enough. So with the case out of the way, what are we going to use for accomplishing this task? Now, admittedly, I've gone a little bit overkill on the system, not too much, all right? Clearly, the guy could have got away with less. However, customers' needs change. What you need to understand about customers is that if they start out with this system and their business grows, and his business has grown, it's doubled its size in the last year. If his business continues to grow, I don't want him to have to call me and be upset that his system won't be able to accommodate his new needs. So by giving him a little bit more than what he needs today, should his business grow and should his needs become more demanding, this computer will still be able, hopefully, to accommodate that. And that makes for a happy customer, let me tell you. That's why the customers come to you. If you're a computer technician and they're asking you for your advice, they don't know that they're not thinking about their needs next year. They're thinking about their needs right now. But as a computer tech or a computer consultant, it's your job to find out if the customer can afford to spend a little bit more. We're not talking a lot of money here, especially for a business. You know, maybe an extra $50 to $100. They can get a system that will be able to expand a bit more than if you just get them the bare minimum of what they need. And then the other thing is, if you get them the bare minimum of what they need, they may overall be unhappy with the performance. So again, if you get them something that's more than what they need, you never hear a customer say the computer is too fast. Never had that complaint. So with that said, what are the rest of the parts? Well, UPS man just stopped by today, and as you can tell, I haven't done any of this before. None of this has been checked. I'm assuming all the parts are arriving in good condition, that nothing's damaged. I've not pre-fit anything. This is all being done live, and I'm trying to put as few edits in here as possible, but I will fast forward through some of the more tedious parts just to keep you interested. So let's go ahead and see if I got all my parts, because if I didn't get all my parts, this is going to be a real short video. All right, we have an OEM copy of Windows 7 Professional 64-bit. Now the OEM copy comes in this white box, and there's a bit of tape on it that if we remove the tape, or cut away the tape rather, which sometimes is easier said than done. It's on both sides. And then once we get that tape cut, what you see in the box looks a little more traditional looking. We can just go ahead and pull that tape off of there. So there's our Windows 7, there's our product key, and again, this is an OEM copy of Windows 7. So what does that mean? An OEM copy is just like any other copy of Windows 7, except when you buy a copy of Windows 7 at the retailer, or you buy a boxed copy, it comes in a cardboard box, that comes with support, so you can call Microsoft if you have problems. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried calling Microsoft with problems, but I fix problems myself. I don't need to call Microsoft. What Microsoft does is so companies like Dell and HP and Toshiba and Sony, they go, look, we're not going to pay $150 for your operating system. It's going to drive the price of our computers up too high. We need to bring these computers down in price so the consumers will buy them. So Microsoft says, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll sell you an OEM copy of Windows instead of a retail copy, but we won't support it. You have to support it. So you make sure your customers know that if they have a problem with the computer or with Windows, they have a problem with the operating system at all, they call you. We will not help them. Microsoft will not help them. So if we're not going to have to support it, we'll discount the price. So that's what this is. This is about $50 to $100 less for an OEM copy of Windows. However, it can be often difficult to purchase unless you buy a piece of hardware with it, typically a motherboard. The operating system is tied to the motherboard. Basically, according to the Windows license agreement, if you upgrade your motherboard, according to their license agreement, your copy of Windows, you have to buy a new copy of Windows. That your copy of Windows is tied solely to the motherboard, not to the case, not to the hard drive, to the motherboard. But there's an exception. If your motherboard fails and needs repair or replacement, then you can, in fact, reinstall it. And Microsoft wouldn't know if you were lying to them. I'm just saying. Not advising, just a point of fact. Okay, here's the memory I've got. This is the Guile Ultimate Gaming Experience memory. This is 16 gigs, and hopefully it'll be compatible with this motherboard. We'll find out. This was the best bang for the buck I could find for 16 gigs of DDR3. It's PC3 1066, which is 1333 megahertz. We'll set that aside. Our power supply is an Antec. It's just a 380 watt. But that's all we're going to need. A lot of you building gaming systems, you know, your video cards need more than this. This system has a built-in video card right on the motherboard. So, you know, it's not going to have a big power draw. And more importantly, this computer is going to be on 24/7, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. So this is an earth watts power supply. It's more energy efficient. It will cost the customer less money to run it. Something else the customer's not going to get if they buy a Dell or an HP. And a reason why when they come to you, or if you're in this business, you think about these things for your customer. Now, this is our hard drive. And what we've got here is a 500 gig SATA drive. And let's just prop that open here. So what I went with was a 500 gig Western Digital Blue drive. And again, not the fastest drive, but it runs cool and it runs quiet, and these are important things in an office. And again, where it's going to be on 24/7, the slower drives run cooler and they're more energy efficient. They won't cost as much money to run. Want to keep the heat down as much as possible. Now we've got just your basic DVD drive here. This is a SATA. Of course, everything's going to be SATA. So this is a Samsung DVD writer. And again, SATA, very inexpensive. We're only probably going to need it to load the operating system and whatever software he needs to put on it, but he definitely needs it. The motherboard. You know I like gigabyte boards. I think they're a good value. They're reliable. I went with a board called an H61M HD2. And this board has, as I mentioned, built-in video. It also has built-in network, a gigabit network, and built-in audio. So we don't have to buy an audio card. We don't have to buy a network card. We don't have to buy a video card. Again, we're not gaming with it. However, for the video to work on this, you need to make sure you get a HD video enabled processor from Intel. So in that case, I went with the Core i5-3570 that has the HD audio built, or I'm sorry, the HD video is built into that. So this has, it's a quad core, it's 4 cores, 3.4 gigahertz, 6 megs of cache, and it's 77 watts. So again, it's not a high wattage processor. We get back to trying to keep things energy efficient, nice and cool, and cheap to run. So that is everything we need to build our computer. The rest of the box is empty. As you can see, we got our packing list here. And of course, links to all of these products are going to be in the video notes down below. That'll take you if you wanted to build a system like this or compare the prices I paid to whatever the prices are today when you're watching the video. As you well know, the prices reflect the day and year that I am building this system. Things can happen, as they've happened before, where the floods in Thailand raised hard drive prices, and then people would watch my video and say, how did you get that hard drive for that cheap? Not realizing they were watching a video that was a year old. Or people go, why did you spend that much for memory? And once again, not realizing that the price of memory has dropped quite a bit since I made that last video. So when you watch my videos, please keep in mind the date and the year that they were made, because they're going to be on YouTube for many, many years. And as long as they remain useful to people, I'll continue to keep them available for people to enjoy. So with that, I say let's get to building, shall we? The first part we can put in is very simple. It's the power supply. And we'll just go ahead and get the power supply out of the box here. Some power supplies come with power cables, some do not. So be aware of that. I'm swimming in power cables. I got tons of power cables. And if you build as many computers as I do, you will too. We'll just get this packing material out of the way. There we go. This is silica gel or desiccant. This is not a pack of chiclets. It's not advised to eat this. I still crack myself up. Seriously, don't eat it. I was just thinking of what I did on the last video with that. I don't know why it has to say do not eat. By the way, really you shouldn't eat any of this stuff, just so you know. I mean, if they're gonna say do not eat on this, I mean, they ought to say do not eat on this and do not eat this. This is not food. All right, just so we're clear. I know I'm in a kitchen and I am sort of mixing some ingredients together here, but if you're that hungry, oh, maybe you shouldn't be building a computer. All right, so here we go. This is our power supply. This is very simple to put in. The power supply comes with a set of screws. It also comes with a set of instructions. And of course, these instructions will be put away because they contain all kinds of important information that, you know, who knows, that you can't live without. Now, let's get this turned around here so you can see it. Here's our power supply. Here's the bag of screws that a power supply came with. Let's get these screws out of here. Whoa. All right, very simply, you'll see the power supply has a screw in each corner, except right here there's one that's away from the corner. That's how you know which way to orient the power supply in the case. Most cases are going to have one offset screw, which on this case you can see is right there. So this power supply is going to go in this way, so that this offset screw right here is going to line up with that offset hole right there. So to put this in, we just step over here. See if we can get you a good angle on this. We just want to line this up here. There's nothing in the case to worry about bumping into. And you can just visually see that the holes there are aligned. And this case, unfortunately, does not have anything to support the power supply. If I let go of it, it just wants to fall down. So what I need to do is more or less keep one hand on it, as you can see I'm doing here, and then grab my cordless screwdriver. Very important that you use a magnetized tip screwdriver. I can't emphasize how important this is. Magnets only affect magnetic media like floppy disks or zip disks or I don't know, hard drives store magnetically, but hard drives also have one of the biggest earth magnets inside of them. You'd think that the magnet that moves the actuator back and forth across the hard drive heads would interfere with the storage of the data, but magnet doesn't seem to hurt it. However, a very powerful magnet, such as a degausser, an electric degausser, can erase a hard drive. But your magnetic screwdriver will not. There's nothing you can hurt with the magnetism of a screwdriver. However, you can hurt things if your screwdriver is not magnetized and you're dropping screws down in things and scratching things up. If you scratch any of the traces on the motherboard, for example, that may not be recoverable. So very important, magnetic tip screwdriver. If your screwdriver does not have a magnetic tip, you can always buy a magnetic extension. That's what I have here. And that gives me a little more length on the tip of the screwdriver, and it magnetizes it at the same time. So what I'm going to do here, we've got 4 screws. We just start it anywhere you'd like, but we don't want to tighten any of them down. And again, it's a little tricky. And if I didn't have a magnetized screwdriver, I think I would need a third hand. So we just got that started. Finally, I can release it, let it go. And now we can go ahead and start these other ones. And this will be number 4. Now the sound you're hearing, that grrrt sound, that is the clutch kicking in on the screwdriver, and that assures I don't over tighten the screws. This is set on 2.5, and it goes all the way up to 6. So I keep it pretty light. The screws need to be snug. I do warn people that electric screwdrivers, if you're not somebody who works with them every day, should only use them for taking screws out, not for putting screws in. It's very easy, if you're not familiar with your electric screwdriver and how it feels when the screw is going in, if it's cross-threaded or not. If you cross-thread the screw, you'll damage it. You'll damage the screw and you'll damage the hole it goes into. And it may never tighten, it may just spin and spin and spin, and it won't hold that item in place securely. And if you ever need to take that item out, it may be difficult to get the screw to come back out. So only use an electric screwdriver for tightening screws if you're comfortable with your electric screwdriver, you've got some experience with it, and you know how it feels when things are going right, and you know how it feels when things are sort of cross-threaded. If you're uncertain, just get a regular screwdriver with a magnetic tip. They're very inexpensive, and it's not really saving you that much effort anyway. I do this a lot, and to avoid carpal tunnel syndrome and all kinds of things, and just pure laziness, I use my electric screwdriver. But bear in mind, I've been doing this a long time, so I'll let you decide what's best for you. But do know, magnetic tip, highly recommended, won't hurt anything. Keep it away from your floppy disks, you'll be fine. That's it. Our power supply's in. That's just how easy it is. There's the side of the power supply there. That's what it looks like from the back. And we can go ahead and punch this little tab out right here, like that. And if we want, since we're doing the easy stuff first, we can now take our optical drive. And the optical drive, you're not going to feed it in from back here. No. The optical drive gets fed in from the top, from the front, and then it just feeds straight back. And then you just sort of have to line it up with your fingers and what looks flush. And that should also line up with the holes here on the case. And you'll see this case has 4 different holes that are potential for us to use to line this up. So it's important, if you care about the way your case looks, if you want it to look like it's done, I don't know, let's call it right, that you make sure that this is flush and the holes line up properly, which they all do here. So as I mentioned, all the screws you're going to need come with the case. So let's go ahead and open this little bag of screws up and see what we've got. Now this bag has 4 different types of screws in it. We've got the little motherboard standoff, which, see if I can show it to you here. It's kind of difficult because it's so tiny. That's the little motherboard standoffs we'll be using here soon. We don't need them right now. These screws are kind of funky looking and are unique to this case. Okay, this is not a normal... Come on, focus. This is not a normal... It's focusing on my face. So if I hold it by my face, maybe you can see it. This is not a normal standard screw. This is unique to the case, and it's used for your hard drive. So we'll get to these later. The next screw is just a very common case type screw. It's got a coarse thread, and it's got a hex head on it, which again, we'll try and... Come on, focus, darn you. Which just sort of looks like that, okay? And then finally, the other screw it's going to come with are these shorter depth screws. It has a bit of a rounded head on it there, and it's got a very fine thread. Again, a little bit difficult because the camera's focused in on my face. It's a little difficult to get you the close-up of those, but they're very, very different, very easily toward apart. You can tell them apart very easily. So we're going to use this screw right here, the shorter one, that's got the fine thread, for our CD drive. And once again, just start the screw, don't tighten it. You're going to put 2 screws in on each side. So there's our first 2. Turn the case around. If the screws aren't quite lining up, you can just go ahead and put your hand in and push the drive, or push it in this way, whatever it takes. And that's why we're not quite tightening the screws down yet, so we can wiggle the drive around as we need to. Now we can tighten them down. This one right in the corner is actually quite difficult to get at. And these do not have to be super tight. You know, I didn't even engage the clutch on this. Once the screw stops turning, that's as much as it needs. We just don't want this to wiggle back and forth. I mean, unless you're going to put this thing in the mail and ship it, it's probably going to be fine with the screws just fitting snug. So you can see our case is starting to come together now with our optical drive in place and our power supply in place. And with that done, we can now set this aside and start prepping our motherboard. That's the fun part. Now I like to prep the motherboard before I install it in the case. So let's go ahead and open the motherboard box, and you'll see what the motherboard box has inside. That is a couple of SATA cables, which is great. That's exactly how many we need. 2. One for the hard drive and one for the optical drive. We'll set those aside for now. This, very important, this is our I/O shield. This is going to go on the back of the case, and it's going to line up with all the ports on the back of this motherboard. The motherboard itself, there it's in its anti-static bag. We'll just set that aside. And then underneath here, we've got the motherboard directions and the drivers for the motherboard and utilities. And this one, at least now, they're starting to include Windows 8 drivers, which is nice to see, although we're not using Windows 8 on the system, as I mentioned. Typically, when I'm done with a system, I'll keep all the instructions together along with any spare parts, spare screws, face plates, and things like that. I'll keep it all in the motherboard box and then give that to the customer with the computer. Those are the 2 boxes the customer sees. All these other boxes and stuff get thrown away, assuming everything works. If anything does not work, you're going to need to put it back in the box it came in, exactly as it was, to ship it back for repair. Just so you know, just a heads up. The other thing we can use the box for is to simply work on the motherboard with. I won't go back over the issues of static, anti-static straps and things. I've talked about that on previous videos. You can go back and look at my other videos for more information about that. But let's go ahead and get rid of that. And now here's our motherboard. As you can see, this is a PS2 keyboard or mouse. That's why it's purple or green. There's two USB 2.0 ports here. We've got analog audio and analog video, VGA, and DVI video, digital video here. This port here is HDMI, two more sets of USB 2. This is our gigabit Ethernet port, and then this is our speakers. This is green, blue is line in, and red is microphone. It's all pretty standard on motherboards. See, we've got a pretty small motherboard here, and you can see the size of my hand. See, the motherboard's pretty small. We've got two memory slots, which is all we need. We just pull those little tabs aside. You see how those move back and forth. We'll open those up to prep those to receive memory. This is the CPU retainer, and we just pull that out like so and lift it up, and that whole thing comes up. And you'll see there's a note on this. It says, always place this cover if the CPU is removed from the socket. Please read the user manual for details. So you don't want to throw this little piece out. If you ever have to send the motherboard back to the manufacturer under warranty, they're expecting you to cover those little tiny surfaces up with this cover. They're very delicate. Do not touch these with your finger. It's very easy that you can bend one and then your world becomes miserable. All right, we're all happy, right? This is our CPU. We can go ahead and install that first. As you can see, we've got a Intel Core i5. I already talked about what that is. Just go ahead and pull that out. And there's our instruction manual. I'm not exactly sure how useful this instruction manual is, but they do give you this little sticker to put on your case on the back of the manual there. So, you know, that makes it go faster. All right, let's put that aside. Now, here's our CPU. And to get to it, first we need to take the heatsink and fan out. Now, the heatsink and fan are all one piece. They're covered in plastic. Why? Because there's thermal paste right there. That thermal paste, you don't want to touch it with your fingers. You don't want to contaminate it with finger oil. Let's just keep it covered up and set it aside until we need it. Now, to get the CPU out of the box, you just simply pull on the flap here. That opens up like so, and then there's $200, our CPU. So let's go ahead and just set that aside, and let's put this all sort of off to the side. Now the CPU has it's not pins anymore. They used to be little pins. Little pins would bend and they'd break. So now they have something called landings. And so these little landings are all smooth, and again, we don't want finger oils on them. So hold it by the edges. You'll see the little plastic case has two little indentations on each side, what makes that real easy to lift out. The other thing you'll see on the CPU is it's got two notches, one here, get that on the camera, and one equally on the other side. Again, we don't want to touch the top of this. We don't want finger oils on it. We want it as clean as possible. If you touch it, get some rubbing alcohol or denatured alcohol and a Q-tip and clean it off, and then let it air dry. It'll air dry in seconds. But do make sure it's dry before you attach the heatsink. Putting this in, very simply, it's only going to go in one way. As I mentioned, it's got the little notches. If you look for the little notches that exist on the socket, we're just going to rest that without any pressure at all until it fits into place. You can see I cannot wiggle it. It's in place. Next, we drop the retention holder down like so. It's going to have two prongs that slide underneath this screw. When I move that forward, you see that? It's going to go underneath that screw. And then there's some resistance here. That's okay. It's supposed to be tight. It's pushing that CPU down so the landings hit the pins beneath. And then we're just going to slide that right underneath that little catch right there, and that holds that in place. Now, we can put our heatsink on. So I'm going to take the plastic off of here. Keep your fingers clear of this area. Don't touch that. There's no right or wrong way to put this on. As you can see, it can go on this way, it can go on this way, It can go on this way. I prefer that the Intel logo is going to be facing where it can be read. Knowing this motherboard, when it goes into this case, you'll see that I've already left some thermal compound up, but that's okay because we're going to put it exactly back where it was. Knowing this motherboard is going to sit in this case like this, it's going to be upright. I want the Intel logo to be readable. That's the only reason why I'm putting it on in that direction. It's not that it's more efficient. Another thing to keep in mind is the length of your cable. So in this case, we can see where the pins are on the motherboard. Here it says CPU fan right here on the motherboard. We need that cable to reach. So that's another consideration. This CPU fan, however, comes with a very long cable, as you can see. So having it reach the fan is not going to be a problem. So what I'm going to do right now, again, I've just rested the heatsink on top of the CPU, is you take your thumb and push down, straight down on these plastic towers that stick up. Now, you'll notice the little plastic towers have a very small arrow pointing counterclockwise. The reason for that is if you want to take the CPU heatsink off, you would then turn that and then lift up on it to get it to disengage. So from the factory out of the box, all the arrows should be in the opposite position, right? So when it's turned in this position, it's to take it out. So make sure that that is set up right, or these will not lock into place. What I like to do is use my thumbs and hit two opposite corners. You'll hear it click into place. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's how easy that is. You'll see that on the underside of the board, where the little plastic tabs are, this is what's holding you see these little plastic tabs? That's what's holding that heatsink down and in place. So it's just that easy. Now, why do some people get bigger fans or water coolers? Those are typically people who want to overclock the system. If you don't want to overclock your system, if you have no desire to do that, and I don't recommend doing it, it's entirely up to you. Again, this is a business system. The regular heatsink is more than adequate for the CPU. I guarantee you, Intel and AMD both would not sell an inadequate cooling system for their part. Just like a car has a radiator that's sufficient for cooling the engine, but if you're going to race the car and put a turbocharger in it, you're going to need to improve the cooling because you're running it beyond its design limits. As long as we run this processor the way Intel made it to run, in other words, not overclocking it, the CPU fan is, again, more than adequate. I find them to be quiet, more quiet in most cases than aftermarket models. It's also, in most cases, more flush. Some of the fans I've seen are this big and they stick way out and they won't fit in the case right. So I'm a big fan of the regular OEM fans unless you're going to overclock. Now we can take this extra cable here and we can sort of wire tie it up because we've got so much of it. And we just can see that there's a 4-pin plug right here, and it says, if I turn this around right here, if you look really closely, it says CPU fan right there. So what we want to do is take this 4-pin connector, and you'll see the 4-pin connector has little grooves on it, so it can only go on one way. So we're just going to go ahead and line those little grooves up and push it straight down. And like I said, we'll get a little wire tie and we'll wire tie that up so it's nice and neat and out of the way. Okay, the next thing is we can put our memory in. So we're just going to take the memory out of the box here. Again, important to hold on to the box just in case there's any incompatibility problems with the memory that you want to be able to send that back and exchange it. You need it to put it exactly the way it came back in the box to send it back. Ideally, we've got everything correct, and as I mentioned, hopefully not only did we order the right parts, but the parts came working. Nothing's DOA, I hope. Kind of funky looking memory there, isn't it? Very important when you work with the memory to hold it as much as possible by the edges. Just definitely stay away from what they call the gold fingers. Stay away from those. You'll see one side is got a notch cut into it there, and in the socket there's a notch, and you're just going to line those up. I'm going to plug the one closest to the CPU in first, because if I put the one on the outside in first, then it's kind of a tight fit for me to get the one in behind it. So just for logistic reasons, to make our life simpler, I'm just going to put that in like so, seat it in the socket correctly, and then it's going to take a little pressure on each side with your thumbs, and you should hear and see these little pieces click back into place. Watch very closely. See if I can do it where you can see it. Just like that. And then we'll take our other memory module. Again, each one of these is 8 gigs of RAM. And you want to make sure when you're buying your motherboard that if you're going to buy 8 gig memory modules, that it will support 8 gig memory modules. Especially if your board only has 2 memory sockets like this one, and you end up putting 2 4s in it, and then you have 8 gigs, and later on you want 16, you're going to have to remove those 2 4s and plug in 2 8s. But you better check with your motherboard manual to make sure it supports 2 8s. I've already done that with this board before I purchased it, and it does in fact support a maximum 8 gigs per socket. That's the maximum it allows. Back on there, and that memory is installed, the CPU was installed, and now the motherboard is actually ready to be installed into our case. Now, installing the motherboard into the case really isn't all that difficult, but it's important that you do it right. Now, one of the things we need to do first is to add our I/O shield to the back of our case. You see the back of our case has this great big hole right there, and it just so happens to be the same size as this I/O shield. So we're just going to remove our I/O shield from the bag it came in. We'll get rid of that. And this I/O shield is going to go in this slot here from inside of the computer case. So I'll turn around this way so you can see what I'm doing. Now you'll see that the keyboard and mouse slot, or the keyboard, mouse, and then USB are here, your video's here. You can just tell from the way the holes are, the audio's down here. And you know the motherboard's going to go in with the keyboard hole on the top and the speakers and audio ports down below, because you can put this in upside down. If you put it in upside down, it's not the end of the world. You just push it back out. It's going to go in this way, as I mentioned, this direction. And we're just going to reach inside of the case here, like this. And we're just going to line that up. And then just push it into position. That's all there is to that. You can see our I/O shield is now in position. Okay, now let's go ahead and lay the case down on its side. Make sure to get all the wires out of your way. So in this case, we got these power supply cables. They're sort of in our way. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove the wire ties from the cabling here. Being careful not to cut the cables, because that'll ruin your warranty and your power supply at the same time. So let's go ahead and cut both of these little plastic ties off. Let's take these cables and let's drape them over the side of the case and get them out, so we have a nice open area there to work in. That's where our motherboard's going to go. Now you're going to see in this particular case, because it's a micro ATX case, you don't have as many choices of holes to use as you do on larger cases, which accommodate smaller, mid-size, and larger motherboards. This case is designed to work solely with micro ATX motherboards, and for that reason, there's fewer choices to get wrong on where you're going to put those standoffs, because the standoffs are metal. If you put a standoff in the wrong place where a hole in the motherboard doesn't line up, then it can short out underneath the motherboard and it can damage the board. Your system won't turn on. It's bad times all around. So what we need to do first is dry fit the motherboard and make sure that the holes line up properly, or which holes line up properly that we're going to use. So if I grab our motherboard here, and you'll see I grab it by the heatsink. I'm not touching the motherboard itself. I know it's going to go in this direction. There's our keyboard here. There's our audio down there. It's going to go in this way, like so. and I can just sort of dry fit it, and I can see which holes are going to line up with this computer, with this motherboard. And I can tell already that we're going to use every single one of these screw holes that are available, except for the very bottom one right there on the right. So here's how we do that. First of all, we'll put this back on the motherboard box. And let's get you a different camera angle here that hopefully can show this in better light. Now when we look at our motherboard, which, see if I can hold it here by its edges. There we go. We've got 6 places for screws to go on the board. There's 3 on the right and 3 on the left. So we know we're going to need 6 motherboard standoffs that need to be placed into the holes on the back of this case and in the right place. So with the bag of screws that came with the motherboard, we want to grab 6 of these little standoffs here. Now these standoffs have a hex head on them, as you can see, and they are 5mm in size. Now I happen to have a special socket that ratchets with a 5mm socket end on it. However, if you're not sure where to find one of these, a great way to get started is with one of these computer toolkits that they sell pretty much everywhere. And the computer toolkit, let's see if we can open this up, has everything you need to build your computer. You've got your large and smaller Phillips, larger, smaller straight edge, and right here is your 5mm socket that you need for tightening those motherboard standoffs. It also works for tightening any of these ports on the end of the motherboard, these little screws here. If your customers torque them down really tight and the screws end up coming out, those are also 5mm, it's the same size. So it's a dual purpose tool. It's not just used for the motherboard standoffs. So having already checked which holes are going to line up with the motherboard, we can start these by hand. Now that they're all started by hand, we can go ahead and start tightening them down. You want to make them a little bit more than snug, but not too tight. If you strip them out, once again, things can be more difficult than they need to be. So just a little bit more than snug. Do not over tighten them. Next, we're going to take our board now, and we can actually go to mount it into the case. It's going to go in with the ports first on a bit of an angle and line up the holes with the ports so that you can see I'm fitting the video port here sticks out. Make sure it goes into its slot properly. And then lay the motherboard flat and verify that when you look through the holes in the motherboard that you can see the standoffs. We use 6 standoffs and make sure you can see all 6 of them. If you don't see one, that means it's hidden somewhere into the board and shorting something out. Take the board out and do it again. Now the next thing is to know which screw you need to use to tighten it down. Now this case came with a bunch of screws like these, and these are the fine threaded screws that we used when we installed the optical drive. I'm going to guess that's probably why they gave us so many, is they want us to use them for tying the motherboard down. But we can dry fit one here. We've got a spare standoff, and we can just see if they go together okay. And they do. So that's the right combination right there. So we're going to grab 6 of those. And this is a bit delicate, and if I were you, I would use a manual screwdriver on this. Once again, I've been doing this a long time, so I'm going to use my electric screwdriver. That doesn't mean you should use yours. However, I cannot emphasize enough, especially when you're putting your motherboard in, use a magnetic tip screwdriver. You only want to get the screws started. Do not tighten them down so that you can wiggle the motherboard as you need to for everything to line up properly. Once all the screws have been started, then you can go ahead and tighten them down. Again, they should be just a little bit snug. And with that, our motherboard is in place. And we can immediately grab the big power connector off the power supply, and go ahead and untangle, take this opportunity now to untangle all the cables, or at least get the main cable untangled here. And this big cable here is only going to go on one way onto this big connector right down here. We can go ahead and put that on now. And you should be able to pull on it gently and it should not come off. That's how you know you've got it on good enough. And then there's a little 4-pin CPU connector here, and if we look on the power supply and we dig through all these cables, you'll see we've got this 6-pin one that's for a video card, so we're just going to go ahead and set that one aside. We're not going to use that one at all on this build, but you may notice that there is a PCI Express slot on this motherboard. So if this customer decides they need to do this graphics or something with this computer, once again, we've given the customer a little bit more than what they need, so that if they should grow in that direction, then they can go ahead and use that PCI Express slot and be able to power a video card with it, with the power supply, unless they need a super duper video card, in which case we'll have to replace the power supply. So these connectors, you'll see there's 2 of them here, and they both say CPU, and it doesn't matter which one you use. And then there's a little clip on one side, and there's a little catch there on the side of the connector, and we're just going to put that in the one direction it fits. It snaps into place. You can kind of lightly pull on it. You'll see it's in there correctly. And then I'll grab a wire tie and just tie that one up so that no one gets confused thinking it came off somewhere if somebody else, such as the customer, opens this up to work on it themselves. They can be confused by that. We also don't want it to interfere with any fans or anything, so we'll just tie that up and out of the way. Now with our motherboard installed, we can go ahead and pick the case back up, set it up right. And let's see, what do we have left? We just have the hard drive left. So this is the 500 gig SATA hard drive. And let's just go ahead and open this up and get it out of here. Once again, there's another silica gel packet. Put that away. Now, this case, the hard drive mounts a little differently. Come around here and show you. Rather than most cases where your hard drive installs flat like this case actually wants you to mount the hard drive on its side. You see, a hard drive doesn't just have holes here. It also has mounting holes on the bottom here. So a hard drive doesn't care if it's mounted upside down, right side up, sideways. It just doesn't need, the worst thing that can happen to a hard drive is that it gets bumped or moved while it's reading or writing, and it could cause the heads to hit the platters, because the heads just ride very, very closely to the platters on a cushion of air. And so what we want to do is make sure that the hard drive is in a secure location where it's not going to get bounced around, and that the holes we're going to use are going to line up properly. Now the front of this hard drive is almost going to touch the front of the case. Not quite sure how well you can see that there. But in order for this to fit, and again, we can put 2 hard drives in this case. You can see we can put one up here at the top, and we can put one down here. It's also possible there's a bay available here that we could use if we needed to install, say, a RAID or something like that, where we needed 3 hard drives, a RAID 5. Clearly we could use a RAID 1 or RAID 0 if we were going to use 2 drives. I won't get into the details of that because, you know, this video will go on and on and on. So I'll make another video about RAID if you're wondering what that is. In the meantime, you can always do a search for it on Google and whatnot on your own to get the idea of what it is. So what we're going to need to do now is get those funky looking screws I showed you earlier, and we need 4 of them. And the motherboard bag contained a total of 8, which makes sense since there's a place for 2 hard drives. You're going to need a total of 8 screws. I always recommend you use the number of screws that the device has available. I've seen people only put 1 screw into their optical drive, or they only use 2 on one side. They don't open the other side up because they're lazy, I don't know. So I always recommend use the amount that's there. Primarily it's there for the computer. If it gets moved around, if it gets accidentally knocked down, or if it gets shipped, You want to make sure that those things are securely in place. If you've ever seen a computer arrive damaged in shipping, when something breaks free in the case, it will bounce around inside of the case throughout the rest of the shipping process until it arrives at its final destination. And by then, the entire motherboard will be completely ripped apart. So even if you have no intention of shipping the computer, it only takes a few seconds more to, as I say, do it right. Now in this case, I'm going to use the what do you think? Should I put the hard drive at the bottom or should I put the hard drive up here at the top? I think I'm going to put the hard drive up here at the top. I think I like it better up there. It doesn't really matter. It's really entirely up to you. So let's just set the hard drive down and let's get one of the screws in place again. Magnetic screwdriver. Again, you'll see I'm holding it by the edges. I'm not touching the circuit board. Now let's go ahead and put this into position so we can look through the holes until they line up, which they do. And now we can start to fasten it in place. Again, don't tighten it all the way down. Be very gentle with the hard drive. The hard drive is probably the most fragile component in your system. It's very delicate. So we'll get these all started here. There's no particular order that you need to do it in. Now that they're all in place, we can go ahead and tighten them down. They don't have to be super tight. Just a little bit more than snug is all that's required. You want to keep the drive as secure as possible. What's nice about this case is it's got these little rubber dampeners, because the hard drive's moving. It's got a platter and a head that's moving, and it shakes. And if the hard drive is mounted directly to the metal of the case, the whole case may vibrate or make a noise that's really annoying. So by having these little rubber bushings, it's going to absorb and dampen that vibration. It'll help make the case run quieter. And it's actually better for the drive too, so the drive's not taking the brunt of the vibration it's creating. They're like little shocks, if you will, like shock absorbers. And so that's it. We've completely run out of parts. We've used all the parts I showed you. They're all completely installed. And all that's left now is to plug the power cable into the hard drive and optical drive, the data cable as well. And then of course hook up our front port umbilicals, meaning hooking up our switches and USB using these cables here. So let's do that next. Now to plug power onto the hard drive and the optical drive, you just need to use one of the SATA connectors that's on the power supply. And this power supply has, let's see, the 5 SATA connectors on there. And you could use any of them you choose. In other words, we could use one here on the optical drive and one here on the hard drive. Or if since I've got two cables, I can use one on the optical drive and one on the hard drive. There's no right or wrong way. I consider how it's going to look when I have to wrap the cables up, what's going to look cleaner. So I think if I go ahead and use one cable, and we'll hook that up to the optical drive SATA connector there, and use the end of the cable, see, because the middle one won't reach. So we'll use the end. There's a little notch here. It only goes in one way, and plug that one on just like that. You see, I've just used one cable. Nothing wrong with that. And then I've got this whole extra cable here I'm not going to use. In fact, we're not going to use any more of these power supply cables. These are all extra. And what we can do is we can wire tie these up and get them out of the way. Now, some people like to do really nice clean wiring behind the case and such. Remember, this is an office computer. It has no case windows. We're not going to be showing the insides off to anybody. Our main concern is that we can work on it in a hurry, because they're going to pay you by the hour. And they don't want you there spending an hour fixing the cabling or undoing really neat cabling when the hard drive dies or they need to upgrade something. As a technician working for an office, you need to make sure that these cables are tied nice and neat in a bundle. It's not really going to impede your airflow like some people think. It's not going to make a difference in your airflow. Primarily what you're trying to do is make sure none of the cables fall into the fans. Make sure none of the cables are going to short out against anything. And if you have to get in there and work on it, that you can cut one tie and everything just comes out real nice and easy, and preferably, you know, not tangled up. So do a nice job when you're coiling them up. So you can get in there, get the job done, then tie it back up, get the covers back on, and get out of there. That keeps the customer happy, keeps you happy, makes your diagnosis faster, and it makes it cheaper for the customer. Now, if it's your own computer and you have all the time in the world to spend on that, there's nothing wrong with it if you want to spend the time doing it. I know as a technician, employers do not want you wasting time. They consider that a waste of time. And if you measure the airflow difference between a nightly bundled set of cables here in the center of the case versus no cables at all, it's an almost immeasurable difference. And the only time it really matters is if you have a ton of fans and you're pushing a lot of air through, and you're overclocking, or you've got a lot of big heat generating components such as a couple of video cards. Those things get hot real quick. So here we're not doing any of that. So don't think that there's only one way to do something. Certain computers do require certain types of cabling or certain types of cooling. This isn't one of them. All right, so just want to make sure we're clear on that. So we're done with these cables, the power cables we're done with. And now what we can do for right now, let's go ahead and get them wire tied and bundled up and nice and clean. Now our motherboard came with the two SATA cables that I mentioned earlier in this video. And these SATA cables are identical, except one of them has a little L-shaped end. Now, it really doesn't matter which cable or which end you use on which device. So the one that has the L-shaped end is really not necessary. However, we can't use it on the hard drive because, you see, there's a little groove here, and that ensures that this connector only goes on one way. And the way it would have to go on would have to be facing outwards like this. And if we were to put that on there, then this cable's basically going to prevent us from putting the side panel back on. However, the optical drive is directly in the back, so we'll use this end of this cable just for neatness purposes on the back of the optical drive. But first, let's hook up the hard drive. This cable's the same on both ends. Doesn't matter which end you choose. Make sure it's oriented in the right direction. It's got a little metal clip on top, and when you plug it in, you'll hear it click into place. Next, we'll take the opposite end of this cable, and down here at the bottom of the motherboard, you'll see it's got 4 SATA connectors labeled SATA 0, SATA 1, SATA 2, SATA 3. This is going to go on SATA 0, just like that. Now we'll take the other SATA cable with the L connector, we'll plug it into the back of our optical drive, like that, and we'll bring the cable down and plug it into SATA 1. Now with the data and power cables hooked up to both our optical drive and hard drive, I've gone ahead and used some zip ties and cleaned those cables up a little bit, got them out of the way. The last thing we have to do is hook up our front port umbilicals. So that's the cables here that come off the front of the case. And that's going to be our USB cable, audio cable, and lights and switches. So I'll show you how easy this is to do. It looks like a lot of cables and it looks a little intimidating, but I assure you, you just plug in one cable at a time and it's actually pretty straightforward. With the USB connector, we'll do that one first because it's really easy and we'll get it out of the way. You'll see there's one pin missing out of this little block. And if we look down at the motherboard, you'll see there's a connector here labeled USB 1 and USB 2. Now we can use either USB 1 or USB 2. I'm going to go ahead and plug this onto USB 1. Because of that little knocked out connector, it's only going to fit on one way. And just like that, we've hooked up our front port USBs. As for audio, I know that this has HD audio on the motherboard. These connectors are identical. The pinouts are in the same place. One is for AC97 audio and one is for HD audio. Most modern motherboards will have HD audio. Typically, it's only the older boards that have AC97. If you plug in the wrong connector, it's not the end of the world. It's just that when you plug anything into the front, like headphones or a microphone, it won't work if you've used the wrong connector. If you look again here on the motherboard, there's a green connector right beside the USB connectors. And once again, there's a pin blocked out, so this will only go on one way, and we simply plug it on like so, and then we can grab a wire tie and just tie this other end down. So once again, there's no confusion that a connector has fallen off or anything like that later on down the road. If you look down at the bottom of the motherboard right beside it, once again where we plugged in the USB, there is lettering here next to this large pin block. And it tells you where each connector goes. And if you have trouble reading that, you can always open the manual that came with the motherboard or pull the PDF down from the motherboard manufacturer's website to see that in a bit larger font. But it tells us here that the bottom row of pins, starting from the left, the bottom row is the hard drive with the positive side of the cable going to the left. The next one over is the reset. And the reset doesn't really have a positive or negative, so that doesn't matter. And then above reset, it shows power. And again, there's really no positive or negative on the power switch. And then above the hard drive is our power LED with the positive also, like the hard drive, going on the left. So it makes sense to start at the bottom and plug the bottom connectors on first, because if you plug the top connectors on first, you won't be able to see the bottom connectors, will you? You'll notice all four of the connectors all have a white wire. That's what they all have in common. That white wire is negative. The colored cable is the positive side. So grab the connector that says HDD LED, and with the red cable facing the positive side, plug that on to its connector. The next plug over is for the reset switch. It has no positive or negative, so I like to put it with the text up so I can read what it says if I ever have to work on it, and just plug that on the next two pins. Above the reset switch, we're going to plug in the power switch. The switches, again, have no positive or negative, so I will put it with the lettering up so I can see what it is. And we'll just push that right onto those connectors there. And finally, we have the power LED. Now, the power LED is split in this case because some motherboards have a 2-pin connector, some have a 3-pin, and some have both. In this case, we're just going to go ahead and put the green side to the left where it says positive, and then just push those two on just like that. Oh, and let's not forget that little speaker that came with the motherboard. That's simply going to plug in right here like that. There's no positive or negative, so I just put it up with the word speaker facing it so I can see what it is in case it's not blatantly obvious. Just keeps everything the same, nice and neat. All right, there's just one thing left to hook up. If you notice right up here in the front, there's a big fan, and that fan is bringing air into the case. If you look on the back of the case, there's also a spot here for a rear fan to be added optionally. I'm not going to put that on, mainly because the motherboard only has one fan connector, and really the fan is optional. In fact, the front fan is optional too. We don't have to hook it up, but it's there, so we might as well. And so like I said, I'm going to leave the back one out because I've got the front one. Just having that extra fan will help. Like I said, it's not necessary, but there's nothing wrong with keeping it a little bit cooler. So there's let's see if we can turn this so you can see it. Right up on the front, the fan here is twist tied, and I've removed the twist tie. And here we've got a 3-pin connector. Now, this 3-pin connector is going to go right here on the motherboard where there's a 4-pin connector. This is just a 3-pin fan connector, but it will fit on the 4-pin fan connector. This is keyed here, so it will only fit on the power connector one way, ensuring you plugging it into the right 3 pins. Just like that. Putting our side panels back on is the very last thing you should be doing. I'm going to go ahead and do it right now. The one without any holes in it here, this one's going to go on this side, like so. And the one that does have the holes for an additional fan, once more, a fan we're not going to need or use, just adds noise and actually generates heat from the motor. We're not going to use that. If we had a video card that was generating a lot of heat, that'd be a good fan to put There'd be a reason why I would use that fan. And of course, to put these covers on, I can show you this a little better. There's little notches here. They're going to fit into the slots, both top and bottom, like about so. And then once they're in, we just want to slide it forward and then feel around and make sure everything is smooth and nothing is bowed out. And assuming so, you can go ahead and put the retaining screws back in. So we'll grab the 4 big thumb screws that the case came with, and we'll just go ahead and put those back on and secure these panels right back into place. And that is our finished computer. All we have to do now is install an operating system and configure it, and it's ready to be delivered to the customer. But first, we better make sure it works. So you know what that means. I'll be right back. Okay, now's the big test. Now we see if it turns on. So when we do this, we only want to plug in the bare essentials, which means we're going to plug the monitor in. So we'll plug that here into the video card that's built onto the back of the motherboard. And we want to plug a keyboard and mouse in. And I picked up one of these combination. This is a keyboard and mouse together. You can see the buttons for the mouse are there, and then the mouse is there, and then that way I just have one USB cable, and this really helps when I travel around and go to a customer site or something. Just to have this, I don't have to have a separate mouse. Everything's together in one neat package. I'll put a link to this in the video notes, of course, if you want to pick one up. They're pretty handy, small and portable, but not too small. It's more or less a full-size keyboard. We're just going to plug that here into the USB port on the back, and then finally, the last thing I do is give it power. So we've got the power cable here. We'll plug that in. Now, if there is a switch on the back of the power supply, make sure the switch is in the on position. And let's just move this keyboard to the side. All right, here we go. Are you ready? It's pretty brave of me to put the covers back on. There's our switch right there. I hear it starting. Fan is spinning. Lights blinking. Oh, heard the speaker beep. Reboot and select proper boot device. Bingo. We don't have an operating system on it yet, so that certainly explains that. What about the lights on the side? Are they working? There's our power light, so that's working. USB and audio input and output that we can test after we install the operating system, but do check them before you put the covers back on, just to make sure that they work. Let's hit the reset button. Does that work? That seems to work. And while we're resetting, let's see if that hard drive light, yeah, the hard drive light's blinking on and off. So that tells us we've got the hard drive light hooked up correctly as well. So now the fun part begins. Now we get to install the operating system. Once we get the operating system installed and configured and some antivirus, we'll be able to deliver it to the customer. And on this system, because it's going to be a system that's not really used by anybody, we're not going to put Java or Flash or Adobe Acrobat Reader on there, because those are often ways people will exploit the computer and break in and put viruses on and whatnot. So, you know, Java seems like they have updates every other week, which is ridiculous. So if you don't absolutely have to have it, especially Java, I'd say just take it off the system unless you have to have it. And if you have to have it, you know, get your updates every couple weeks when they come out, because they're critical. Can't emphasize that enough. Now we can install our operating system, but I know a lot of you have asked questions about how to set up the BIOS properly. Really only a couple of changes I make in the BIOS. Primarily, make sure the date and time is right. Make sure it's set to boot from the optical drive first before the hard drive. Make sure AHCI mode is enabled on the hard drive controller for the best performance. Whether you're using a regular hard drive or a solid state drive, either way you want AHCI mode. And then finally, I like to make sure the high performance event timer is turned on, enabled for 32-bit or 64-bit. That can make a big difference on some computers on performance. And that's about it. I'll save that. Everything else will be left at the default values. So what I'll do now is, before I put the Windows 7 disk in here, I'll hook this up to the video capture card so you can see me adjust the BIOS. And then I'll put the installation disk for Windows 7 in the drive and reboot it and start the install. We'll do all that through the video capture card, so I don't have to film the screen like that. So, here we go. All right, so here we get our BIOS screen that comes up, and you'll see there's a mouse pointer. When you have a UEFI BIOS rather than a regular BIOS, you can actually use your mouse in it. That's one way to know if you've got a UEFI BIOS. As you can see, you can change the system language. Most of this stuff, we just leave it default. I check the system date, make sure that's correct while you're in here, and check the time. Not that it's that important. Once Windows loads, you can certainly change it in Windows, and when you change it in Windows, the BIOS will match it. But I'll just go ahead and change it while I'm in here. And every BIOS is a little different. In most cases, to change the values, you use the plus and minus keys on the keyboard. Sometimes it's the page up and page down keys. So now if I hit the right arrow, you'll see it's highlighted at the top where it says System. When I hit the right arrow, it's going to move us over to BIOS Features. Here in the boot option priorities, you can set which item you want to boot first. So under boot option number 1, you can see the first item is the Western Digital hard drive. The next one down is the optical drive. That's fine, we can leave it like that. Full screen logo show, that's the big logo that comes up when you start the computer. And as we continue to scroll down these options, I just leave all this stuff alone. And then it just started back over at the top again. So next one over to the right is peripherals, and under SATA mode selection, we want to make sure it's set to AHCI. And again, back to all these other options here, you can set the internal graphics memory size for the built-in video card. Again, I leave all this stuff to default. Everything here looks good. So we go to the right again under power management. Make sure the high precision event timer is enabled. Sometimes you might see it's in some BIOSes 32-bit or 64-bit. Finally, set it to save and exit. So just push enter. It says, do you want to save and exit? And click or hit enter, and then it'll save your BIOS options. And it's that easy. The BIOS is set. Now the computer reboots. Again, you'll see that full screen logo BIOS. That's what I was referring to. It's now starting to boot to the Windows 7 installation DVD. You notice it said press any key to boot from the DVD. You don't have to do that because the hard drive doesn't have any operating system on it. That's why we didn't have to set the optical drive to boot first. It doesn't have any choice. If it can't boot to the hard drive, the next thing it tries is the optical drive. And then after this first boot, for Windows to continue loading, it's going to want to load the hard drive first anyway. So now we just go through the Windows 7 installation. Here you get the main, the first screen, which is where you choose what language you want to install with, what time and currency format, and what keyboard or input method. And I just leave all this. This is all fine, so all you have to do is click Next. This next screen that comes up, all you need to do is hit Install Now. So we'll go ahead and click on that. Here's the end user license agreement. Go ahead and click to accept the license terms and click Next. Now here it says what kind of installation do you want, an upgrade or custom? I always choose custom. So click on custom. And it asks which hard drive you want to install to. We only have the one drive. We don't have to partition or format it. Windows 7 will do that automatically, so just click Next. And at this point now, you just have to wait until you get through the copying of the files, and then the computer's gonna reboot. So we'll fast forward to the first reboot here. So now you'll see it's rebooted. Again, you don't touch any keys or anything, just let the computer do its thing. And now it's going to boot from the hard drive from those installation files. It just copied off of the DVD onto the hard drive, so it's going to boot a bit faster. You'll see it's going to do some more setup, and then it's going to take you back to the installation screen, and it's going to continue installing some more files. So we just sort of need to sit back and wait for that to finish. And again, we'll fast forward a little bit here. Here it's just going to automatically restart the computer, so we're just going to go ahead and let it do that. So now the computer is going to restart itself. And as Windows starts up for the third time now during the installation, this is sort of our final boot during, or reboot rather, during install. And you'll see it's doing this whole checking video performance and such, and you wait for that to finish. So on this screen, we have to create a username. Since this is a PC I'm using to record with, I'm just going to call it my record PC. So we'll just call the username record. And you'll see below that the computer name on the network will become the username -PC. You can change that separately if you don't like that. And click next. This next window that comes up wants you to select a password. I'm just going to leave it blank so there's no password required. When we hit next, it then asks us to type a Windows product key. I will do that now, but I'm not going to show you the product key. And then when you get that done, click next. The next screen is going to ask if you'll let Windows automatically download updates. I recommend it, so use the recommended settings. That's what I would recommend you do. And then after you select that, it asks for you to verify your time zone. I'm in Arizona, so I'll select Arizona as my time zone and then verify that the date and time are correct, which I just previously set in the BIOS, so they're good. Hit next. And then it just does this one final sort of adjustment of Windows settings. And your desktop now appears and Windows is ready for you to use. Of course, we don't have it plugged into the network or anything. There's no internet. So at this point, I make a few changes. I go in the control panel and I change this view from category view to the large icon view. I just like that view better. To me, it just gives me access to everything I want much quicker. And then a couple other changes I make are I go into the system section of the control panel and under advanced system settings. Over here I click the settings button and change this automatically restart. I uncheck that and then click OK. That's if it gets a blue screen error. It'll just restart the computer before you have a chance to even read what the error says. Then I go ahead and close that out. I also like to add the My Computer icon to the desktop. So if you just right click on any empty spot on the desktop, choose Change Desktop Icons and put a check next to where it says Computer, then click OK and close the window. You'll see I've got the computer icon now on the desktop. Now's a good time to take the Windows 7 installation DVD out of the optical drive and put the motherboard driver CD or DVD into the optical drive. And then wait a second for it to recognize the drive. And then I'll click on the My Computer icon here, double click on the DVD drive. And this auto run window appears asking if I want to run the run.exe file, which I do. So we'll just go ahead and click that. Are you sure? We click yes. We can close that window down. And now the motherboard installation, now the motherboard drivers can start to be installed. Now, as you can see, this is Gigabyte. Different motherboard makers obviously have different software, and the way that it installs varies from one manufacturer to another. So in this case, we go right from the home screen and we untick the things we don't want, like Google Chrome and the Google toolbar. And as we scroll down, like Microsoft.NET Framework I want, but Norton Internet Security, I don't want that, so we'll uncheck that. Everything else I leave checked. Everything else are drivers, except the very last thing is this on-off charge feature that Gigabyte offers. We don't need that, so we're going to uncheck it. And then we hit where it says Install All, even though it's not really going to install all. It's only going to install the items we selected. And then we'll go ahead and speed this video up to get to the point where that's done installing. Now while this is installing, I'll go ahead and plug it into the internet. So we'll plug the Ethernet cable into it. And the final thing it asks us is if we want to install Gigabyte utilities. I don't want to do that at this time, so I'm going to click no. And then it's going to ask, or it's going to tell us that the install's finished and to reboot. So we'll click OK, and then you'll see that because the network card driver just loaded, it says, oh, you're on a network. What kind of network is it? It's a home network, so I click on that. And then it takes a couple, it takes a minute or so for it to configure the computer's network settings for that. It tells us to select what items we want to share. I don't want to share anything, so I'm just going to untick all these boxes. and click next. And here's the home group password. I don't really use home group, so I'm just going to hit cancel here. That doesn't matter. And now we're going to go ahead and reboot the computer. So we'll go to restart right here, and we'll restart the computer. Now, one of the first things the computer is going to want to do when it restarts is it's going to detect a bunch of new hardware that it just loaded the drivers for. And then for those changes to take effect, it's going to want to restart right away. So you'll see just as soon as our desktop appears, it asks, it says, please restart your computer for changes to take effect. So once again, we go ahead and let that restart. Now with our drivers loaded, I can do a few more things, the configuration changes that I like to make, like down in the system tray here. I like to hit the customize button and tell it to always show me all icons. I don't like Windows to hide anything, so I just check that little box that just says to always show the icons, and then click OK. And then we'll go back to the control panel. Under power options, and we're going to hit the little down arrow here for other options, and we want high performance. This isn't a laptop. We're not trying to save batteries here. We want the best performance we can get. We can close that out. The next thing we want to do is go to Windows Update. So we'll go back to the Start menu under All Programs and click Windows Update. And then you'll see here it wants us to install this, so we'll go ahead and install it. So once that update's done, then it's going to check for, now it can use Windows Update now, so it's going to check for missing updates. As you can see, we've got a ton of them, well over 100 of them here. So we'll just go ahead and click Install the updates. And this end user license agreement comes up. Go ahead and agree to it. And click Finish. And now we wait for it to download all these megabytes of updates and install them. So we'll fast forward the video here. Once those updates are complete, we're going to have to restart the computer. So let's go ahead and do that now. And click Restart Now. So I'm going to go back to the Start menu, back to All Programs, back to Windows Update. You'll see there's another important update. There's some optional updates here. We'll go ahead and grab these as well. And then click OK. And then we'll click to install these updates. And once again, we have to wait for the downloads to complete and to then install. Once they've completed, of course, we've got to restart the computer again. And once the computer restarts, we go back to All Programs and back to Windows Update. So now it tells us it has all the updates, but you see there's this option here to get other updates from Microsoft besides just Windows. So let's go ahead and click on that. Now this box that appears is because it downloaded a new browser. This is IE9. So I had to sort of click next on that and get that out of the way and then close that tab. Now we can accept a license agreement for Microsoft Update and then click Install. And then that automatically restarts Windows Update, which now becomes Microsoft Update. I can go ahead and close that window behind it. And now it's checking for updates to things other than Windows, such as Microsoft Silverlight or Bing or Windows Live Essentials, Microsoft Security Essentials. All that now becomes part of the update process. As you can see, there are a couple of optional options here, a couple of optional updates here. We're going to take these two, and that we're going to hide that one. All those are already checked, the important ones, so we click OK, and then we click Install Updates. Again, we've got an end user license agreement to agree to, so we'll do that, and then once again we wait while it downloads and installs those updates. Now you see during the update process there's a window back here kind of hidden. That's the installation for Microsoft Security Essentials Antivirus. So we'll click Next and click Next. I don't want to join their customer participation program. Click Next. Then we click Install. And what's happening is until we finish this, the update window behind it won't finish. So here we'll click Finish. And that's going to get the latest virus definition files for Microsoft Update and then do a quick scan of the hard drive. Now, the updates that are running behind it can continue, so they're doing both at the same time now. Now, even though the updates have finished, I want to wait for Microsoft Security Essentials to finish what it's doing before I restart the computer. So we'll wait for that to finish its scan. And then once that's done, we can go ahead and close out Microsoft Security Essentials. And then this Internet Explorer window will pop up saying, you know, welcome, etc. So we'll just close that and get it out of the way. And now we can restart the computer for those updates to take effect. After we've rebooted, we go back to the Start menu, back to Programs. Now, even though it says there are no updates available, I'm going to go ahead and hit Check for Updates anyway, just to force Windows to take another look, just to see if there's any updates to the updates that we just updated. Did you get all that? So there it is. It shows Windows is now current and up to date. Now, in some videos, you'll see me install Java, Flash, or Adobe Reader. However, for this particular computer, we won't need to put any of that on there. So pretty much all it needs are the drivers and the Windows updates. So now that we know we've got all the updates, we can go ahead and shut this computer down and then deliver it to the customer. It's ready to be delivered for the customer to install whatever software they need to use the computer for whatever purpose they need it for. Please show your support for my videos by clicking the like button under this video. Also helps if you favorite it, and if you subscribe to my channel, you'll be alerted to whenever new videos are posted immediately. As soon as the videos are posted, you'll be emailed if you subscribe to the channel. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.